What's going on, guys? I've been having a little bit of audio issues with my mic. I just recorded a couple videos, played them back, and I was kind of cutting in and out a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm still doing that. I kind of blew everything out and freed up a little bit of storage on my phone. I don't know if maybe that was part of the issue. We'll see what happens, but I wanted to fire up the phone real quick, or the camera rather, and give you guys a couple of tips and tricks, or maybe at least something even just to think about. If you're a knife maker like myself, trying to do some batch work. I'm currently working on 36 knives, which is a pretty healthy batch for anybody, especially a little home shop like me. And it's always been something that I've had a lot of fun with, trying to come up with better, faster, more precise or accurate ways to kind of do things, especially repeatedly, that I can kind of do better and better and better and over and over and over. Something I kind of like to do is almost like a game to myself, to try to become more efficient and more repeatable, at the very least, and hopefully even better, at the end of it all or with each knife or project. So, got a couple ideas here. For one, and if you guys follow me on Instagram, you may have seen a quick little clip. One thing I did do in order to lay all these out, just to kind of explain a little bit of the process and how we're getting to what the main meat of this video is going to be. I laid all of these out using my CNC router. I've got a 4x4 CNC router over there that I built. And I also have a drag knife that I made. And these are commercially available off the shelf. It's just a spring-loaded diamond point that goes in the spindle and, proceeds down onto the material to scribe the pattern, much like a carbide or a hand scribe would, scratch all, something like that. Same thing, it's just very precise, very repeatable, leaves a nice engraved line for everything. And a lot of guys just use these for engravings, glass, plastic, steel, and even hardened steel, though this is, or was, annealed and softened when I was using it. It just works really well. It's very repeatable. It's very efficient, much more so certainly than taking an individual pattern, clamping it onto a piece of stock, scribing around it with a pen, pencil, marker, scribe, and then, taking that loose and doing it over and over and over again, much less 36 times like I was able to do. It's basically just, lay it out in your CAD software, load the program, hit go, and once everything's set up and positioned, you can walk away, work on something else. And it's just really nice, and it really allows you to maximize stock. So that's just kind of one idea I'll throw out at you. It certainly works better in my experience, again, than the clamping each one, or even just printing out a pattern and gluing it, to a piece of steel or a sheet of steel. That's all well and good. I've used that, it works. But those paper patterns do tend to get burned as you're cutting and grinding. You get dirt and oil on them. You smudge them, they peel off, they come loose. And sometimes they're just not even that precise to begin with, depending on your line weights or how good your printer is. So while there's any number of ways to skin a cat, my favorite way thus far for pattern layout is definitely on the CNC with that drag bit, and it has worked really well. Now, the other thing I was also able to do, which really works quite well, is I use a centering drill with the CNC router to spot each one of these holes. Most importantly, and particularly the pinholes. I've got 3 of them here that are slightly bigger than the rest, and then the lanyard tube hole. That does a few things for me. For one, it makes the setup jig that I'm going to show you in a minute able to be used very efficiently. It also allows me to kind of batch handles together, and I could, even cut out some handle blanks on my CNC, put the pinholes the same spacing and pattern apart, and be able to just put those right on and, go to shaping them or however I end up doing that. So there are quite a number of advantages. It doesn't take all the guesswork out of everything. It's certainly not a, insert raw materials on one end, collect knife at the other. Don't get me wrong, there's still a learning curve. There's an investment, and it does take time and effort still. But it does add an amount of precision and repeatability and even efficiency to your work and to your product. So that's why I like that. And I do encourage anybody, uh, whether you know anything at all or not about CNC machining or CNC routers, I knew absolutely nothing, getting into it. There's a lot of resources out there. Even just get yourself a benchtop machine. Anything I'm talking about here, you could probably do just as well or nearly as well with a cheaper benchtop machine for just a few $100s. As long as you can get a drag bit or some kind of a scribe to fit in that spindle. There are ways to do it and to do it well. Spot holes, engraved patterns, you name it. You could do it for a relatively small investment, certainly less than what I have into it. So just something to keep in mind. Another option being for batch work, just contract it out. I have a water jet company, cut your blanks. That may even be something I look into in the future. These, once they were scribed, I cut everything out by hand. I drilled everything by hand. It was no small task, though I was able to get that precision and repeatability. It still was an output of effort and time and expense. So don't necessarily count out, sending it out, especially something simple like pattern cutting or making. Have a water jet do it or a laser cutter, plasma cutter. You're no less of a knife maker for doing so, in my opinion. So just some ideas on that. Now, moving on, the main meat that I want to get into real quickly here before my phone dies is this. Because I am doing so many patterns, I typically am more of a freehand grinder. I've never really had much luck with like the larger grinding jigs. I've built a few over the years, things like this. They're a little bit unwieldy. They work and they do have as much of a learning curve, though perhaps less of one than freehand grinding. There is still a learning curve. And they certainly don't grind the knife for you. Same as the CNC not making the knife for you or doing much, other than what you tell it to do. This is the same way. It only eliminates a couple variables for you, mainly, your angle relative to the table, and maybe, how your knife is pivoted this way, depending on how you it does have its advantages. It also has its disadvantages. But that said, some guys do very well. They make very good work with these. Many guys don't use them at all. They hate them. To each their own. I've tried these. I've made them. They are what they are. But with that being said, I do typically prefer to do a freehand grind and just kind of, use my own hands and senses. But with that being said, when I've got 36 of the same pattern that I want to come out, as identical as I can make each one of them, if I can make things a little bit more efficient, remove a little bit of guesswork from the equation, I do want to do that. So I came up with this little fixture here, about as dead simple as it gets. It's just a scrap of aluminum I grabbed out of the scrap bin, milled the tops and bottoms, square to the sides here, which were already flat and parallel. So I squared the top and bottom to the sides. I squared the ends up. And then I just drilled some pinholes straight through that correspond exactly to two of the pinholes on my handle blanks, the front and middle specifically. I also made sure that the one end here was a little bit behind where my plunge line is going to go, just for visibility's sake to be able to see that. And then the main idea here is just that this is flat and square, and that this is flat and square on the pin faces. And that's it. So the only thing this does is simply just holds my blade perfectly perpendicular to the table, as well as at a fixed angle or a fixed height for this point, so that my plunge lines match up exactly on both sides. Now the advantage to this, not only do I get a little bit more to hold on to, it's a little bit more ergonomic than say just trying to hold this, the whole time. My hands do tend to cramp up if I'm holding something this small and thin for so many hours of grinding. So this gives me a little bit more of an ergonomic grip. It's also very fast and repeatable. I'm not worrying about clamps. I'm not worrying about file guides or setting all that up. Basically, I just grab any one of these patterns because the holes have been laid out very precisely. I can just put on one side, grind it with my right hand, take it off, put on the left side, grind with my left hand. And again, that point and plunge line is at the same height and angle every time, relative to my table and my platen. And it's just that quick, to swap it around to make adjustments as needed. And this has been working extremely well. Again, it doesn't grind the knife for you. It only takes a little bit of the guesswork out of the equation. But what it does do well, and particularly with the addition of a little push stick, where you can very precisely kind of put your pressure where you need it, especially on these smaller, more flexible blades. I've just been really happy with this setup and how this works. Now, just to kind of reiterate a little bit, this is kind of for a specific use case, one repeated pattern that I'm going to do over and over again. That's really where this shines. Now, that said, you can still make something like this on a case-by-case, knife-by-knife basis. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this really doesn't take a whole lot of time or effort. Even if you just bought some square stock that you didn't have to mill. Again, this was just a piece of scrap, which is why I had to do some machining on it. But if you just buy some stock already made, just cut it off, drill your holes, you'll be ready to go. And you could even just put a single pin in it. Just keep in mind that without that second pin, your angle can change, say this way, not exactly this way, but this way. So you do want to have kind of a gauge or a measurement of where that point lands, from the height of the table there. And then you can maybe put a clamp on the back and do it that way. Or you could even make like a multi-pinhole block. Just put a bunch of pinholes in there and put your pins wherever you need to. Maybe they land where you want them to. Standardize your hole spacing a little bit. Just a couple different ideas there. But this, again, works particularly well for repeated patterns, especially if you lay them out precisely, if you have them machined or water jet, or lay them out well and accurately. This is going to work very well for you. It just gives you that extra surface area to hold that blade, perfectly stable and perpendicular. And then you can make your adjustments on your platen forward and back for your angle or your table. And it's been working very well. Here's just a couple quick examples. Still making some slight adjustments. And again, this doesn't do everything for you. I mean, you got to control this angle, in and out, and your pressures, and so on and so forth. So there is still quite a bit of skill involved, and it does take quite a bit of practice. And it's not too terribly far from a complete freehand grind. Again, this is just kind of taking that one little bit of the equation out and kind of giving you those couple of fixed angles. One this way, of course, and the next forwards and backwards. You've still got, everything else to kind of contend with, as well as, of course, your grind heights, your thickness, where your center lines are at, and this and that. So, doesn't, again, do everything for you, but it does make things a little bit quicker, easier, and more efficient, in my opinion. And you may be different, maybe it doesn't. I just want to throw that out to you guys as a little bit of an idea for you to maybe try and experiment with. You can make these, out of aluminum, steel, wood, plastic, whatever. Just try it out, see what you think, see if you like it. Especially if you have an adjustable platen or work table that's really needed for that. You can, of course, always mill the angle or machine your angle into these faces. They just have to be the same for both sides, and you can do that as well. And you can make your pins removable and swappable and that kind of thing too. But again, just throwing that out there in the interest of maybe creating some more ideas. If you guys have any ideas, any suggestions, maybe a different or a better way you like to do things, by all means, let me know. Leave a comment. Any questions, leave those as well, or make your own video and tag me in that. I'd love to see it. But for now, go ahead and follow me on Instagram at Riley Knife and Tool. I also have a Facebook page by the same handle. And I do tend to, these days, post a little bit more on Instagram, though from time to time I do like to make these videos on YouTube. Hopefully the audio isn't cutting out too bad. If it is, I may not even upload this. I guess if you're watching it, you'll know whether I did or not. But all that said, I do appreciate you guys for watching, for participating in the channel and following my work. And if you made it this far, thank you. Again, I appreciate it, and I'll see you guys on the next one.